Welcome to the Leading Conversations podcast, sponsored by the TCAL Leadership Network. On each episode, JD Pairing will have conversations with church planting pastors and leaders from around the country. You can learn more about how to connect with TCAL at the end of this podcast. Let's join JD now and listen in on this leading conversation.
Welcome to the TCAL Leadership Network Leading Conversations podcast. Today, it is our honor to have the great Paul Mintz with us. Paul is an credible leader, really good friend, kingdom-minded pastor, the mayor of Mansfield, Texas.
Wow.
Paul, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, it's my privilege. It's my privilege to join you.
Hey, we like to just find out your story on this podcast. So I know a little bit about your background growing up in a Christian home. So tell me what it was like growing up and how you came to Christ.
I grew up in a pastor's home. Actually, my dad pastored and really felt a kind of a sense of calling to hurting churches. I would probably label them as, looking back now, toxic churches. Would go in and just really try to see churches, doing turnaround situations, and would go into these problematic churches. And, about the time that they would get good and healthy, you're like, okay, it's now I'm going to go to the next one. I was like, our whole childhood, we grew up in these crazy churches that God had called us to. But, my dad was just my spiritual hero. My mom was my best friend. I have four older siblings. And I just came to an awareness. I mean, this is interesting to say. There's biblical precedence for it, I guess, but is that I've just always loved our Lord. I really have. I loved my mom. I loved my family. I loved God so deeply. And about, my mom tells me, it was probably right around the time I turned 5 years old. Just the awareness of sin and the awareness that I was lost, and loving God as deeply as I did, but it was traumatic for me. I mean, night after night, Mom would just say, she would go, he said it again, but I was just like, Mom, you got to have Mike and Dad. Dad and Mike and Wayne and John and Cindy pray for me, because I'm not the fearfulness of my lostness was off the charts, profound for that age. And of course, they were concerned I was too young. I didn't understand everything. And I just remember being in church one Sunday morning. My dad had finished preaching. The invitation was going. I just started bawling. I started crying. And my mom finally looked down and she said, do you want me to take you down front to talk to your dad? I remember just looking up at her. I was just crying. I was like, yes, why won't you let me be saved? And so she did. I remember that day going forward, my dad leading me to receive Christ. I was baptized right after that on my 6th birthday. And that's just been my life. I mean, literally, I don't have some huge rebellion period in my life. As far as my faith journey, but how I came to Christ with that. Now, my relationship with my father really got interesting in its dynamic, because my father did not know how to give approval. He did not know verbally how to affirm. He was still recovering from the abuse from his father, and he was doing the best that he could not to pass that on to us. So he just did not know how to give the blessing and give all that. So I developed this desperate need to try to earn my father's love, earn my father's approval, because it seemed like he approved of all of my older siblings, but not me. And each one of them now, as we've come out of our home, have said, oh, he did the same to me. I thought he was proud of all the four of you, but not me. We all kind of left with this similar father wound, even though it manifested itself in each of our lives very differently. So now I'm called to the ministry, which I swore to God I'd never do. From a lot of the painful things I saw in my dad's church, and go off to college. And this earning and discerning.
Talk about that call to ministry. How did that happen?
This toxic faith just was killing me. Well, I just remember saying, I watched my dad get pretty much slaughtered on the floor of a one of those churches business meetings. It was about a 2-hour meeting. I was sitting on the front row and watching the leadership dynamic of that, and God helping me to see it because it was part of what he used for my calling. But man, it was so painful. Just the way that they were talking about my dad, the way they attacked him. Obviously it was premeditated and all that. And there was some other men that dad had talked to that were supposed to stand up and really address the questions, which they all chickened out. It was just a horrible thing. I remember walking out of that meeting saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I will never do what my father did. That was right before my 9th grade year in high school starts. So we ended up leaving that church. They voted us out, voted my dad out, which was horribly painful. And then we moved to Sweetwater. And for the next 3 years, God just consistently pursued me and was calling me and pursued me and calling me. And just in the last 6 months, every single day, I felt the Spirit of God drawing me to the ministry. And I just said, that's just not what we're going to do. Like here's some 4 or 5 choices, Lord, you pick a card. I'll do any of those. And he said, yeah, well, the problem is none of those are the card I'm going to pick. And so finally just met with my pastor, my youth pastor, and they said, Paul, the issue is surrender. Why don't you just say to the Lord, God, I don't know what you're calling me to, but whatever it is, I'll say yes, which was an extremely fearful decision to make, but prayed through. And finally, my deep desire was to honor the Lord, even though that was my greatest fear. And for about a week or so, I prayed, desperately prayed. I said, okay, God, I'm just going to surrender and say yes. The result of that was I went forward. I surrendered to God's call, whatever that was going to be. And then kind of put the fleece out, told God, me and my brother John pretty much fought like cats and dogs, we're the last 2 of the 5. And so I thought, well, John will never do this. So I said, okay, God, if you want me to be in the ministry, if you call me to preach or whatever, then just have my brother John tell me, because that ain't going to happen. 2 weeks later, I just come back from a mission trip. And at the end of the invitation, short story is John said he thought he was losing his mind, going to go crazy. But he finally he said this word, just kept saying, you've got to go tell Paul I'm calling him to preach. You got to go tell Paul. So he walked from the back row of that church. I was up on stage because we'd just done, reports. He walked all the way up on stage during the middle of the invitation, apologized to me as a brother, told me how much he was sorry, man, I've been a terrible big brother. You turned around and walked off the stage. And he said, man, I thought maybe that would solve it. I wouldn't ruin your life. And God, all the Spirit's all over him again. He turns back around, comes back up on stage and said, I don't know how to explain this to you, but God's telling me that I'm supposed to tell you that he's calling you to preach. And I don't know what else he said, but as soon as he let go, I walked to the front and surrendered my life to God's call to be pastor and preacher and the ministry in a formal way. And so, as they say, the rest is history.
That's incredible. That's incredible with your brother. Wow. Talk a little bit about, I know you were in youth ministry, you were doing other stuff. Mm-hmm. Where did the church planting bug come from?
I was passionate about student ministry. I ended up being a youth pastor for 21 years. And I think I was so convinced of the strategy of and the priority of reaching the next generation that I just was like, I'll do this for the rest of my life. And I think, again, it was part of this fear of, well, maybe I can be a youth pastor, but see, this isn't doing what my daddy did. I'm not going to be I'm not going to be the lead pastor. I'm not going to be but I was a youth pastor. I was 25. I was up and out of college, which I was called to preach, went to college, got a degree in business, got a minor in Bible. I knew I was going to go to seminary. We're in seminary, finished up there and been doing student ministry and traveling and preaching all that through that time. I took our students to a youth camp at Mount Lebanon Baptist in Camp. Some of y'all know that here in the Dallas Metroplex area. Me and one of my best friends from First Baptist Dallas, we did our youth camp together. And I was leading a leadership track, training students on leadership. And just talking about the end in mind, begin with the end in mind, a lot of different things like that. And this, and I was talking about, like, if you could do anything you want to do, be anything you want to be, go anywhere you want to go, guaranteed not to fail, money was no issue. What would you do? What would you be? Where would you go? Just getting them to dream and think and kind of, as 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And this one kid came up to me at the end. He goes, man, I have no idea how to answer that question, but how would you answer that question? And I just remember opening my mouth and basically the vision of TCAL just crawling out of my mouth. It was like I was hearing it for the first time as it was coming out. It's one of those, not out of body, but just, I was like, remembering going like, I've never even thought these things. I've never heard, but they were so in me, and it crawled out of me. And that day, I remember he walked in, he goes, man, that's cool. He just walked off. But I was like, God, are you called? And the Lord's like, Paul, that church must exist. I'm 25 and, I'm in youth ministry. It just didn't seem logical. I didn't know what to do with it. And really it sat dormant in some ways for a long time, because I was 39 when we moved here, and I turned 40 like 2 months later. So, 15 years later, we activate, actually moved and began the process of planting the church. But there's no doubt God had a lot of things that he had to build in me, had to grow in me, and a lot of things he had to chisel out of me, and fears he had to remove from my heart for us to make this big step. But I wish it was more sexy or whatever, but that's really what happened.
So 15 years of waiting for that vision to come to fruition. That's interesting. Hey, can you talk a little bit? I know your vision is bigger than just one church. I mean, you have a vision for seeing church planting movement. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think a lot of that formed in student ministry. Everywhere we went, that God called Shannon and I, it wasn't just about our youth group. It was like, hey, together, all of us are pastoring the city, and, my kids and your kids and all the churches, they all go to school together. They hang out together. They play football together. So we just begin to try to have this mindset of let's build a student ministry network. And in doing so, man, God just kind of, I was kind of stuck in my own little Baptist bubble for a lot of my ministry and a lot of my life. But that began to move me outside of that. I began to fall in love with youth pastors from other denominations and their unique beauty that they brought to the kingdom and the expressions. And I was like, I'm just smitten with the larger picture of the kingdom. Thankful for my tradition, thankful for what I grew up in, but just began to love and grow in this heart. I think so. God's growing that part of my heart, as well as, he was working on growing me as a pastor and getting me past some fears of that. And so when we moved here, we had never heard of Excel and had no idea about them. Matter of fact, I'd interviewed with 4 other networks before I even heard about Excel, and just kept going, that's not it. That's not the right DNA. That's not the right DNA. But we came here, and the passion was like, we don't want to just plant a church, but we want to really start a church planting movement. I had been really hurt in traditional churches growing up. And the church that even I was coming out of, mega church, I say mega, it's probably north of 2,000. We ran somewhere around 2,500. And student ministry, we probably ran 400 on Wednesday nights. And so, but it was eating me alive. And I was like, there's no unity. I was in Shreveport, and it was so segregated, and there's white churches and like our Wednesday night youth ministry, we had blacks and Hispanics and whites and all that. But then on Sunday mornings, like we almost had greeters that if we had some of the students we were leading to Christ from football teams come and want to visit our church, I heard someone report to me, they said, one of our greeters said, you're going to feel more comfortable at the church down the street, and almost wouldn't let an African-American kid come in that church. I was just like, God, I can't be a part of something like this. We've had such a passion for multi-ethnic, plus just this larger passion for the kingdom. So our heart, and I was so frustrated with the established church, which God's healed me from, but I was like, I will never work with the established church again. So our heart was like, if we're not going to work with the 300,000 churches that are already, in existence in America, then we're going to have to start a whole new wave of churches. And so that was kind of my heartbeat, is like, God, let's go plant one healthy church and let's just see if we can't multiply a planting movement, and especially one that had more of an Antioch heartbeat and multi-ethnic heartbeat, and it just started happening.
And you are doing that. You've helped start so many churches and just encouraged so many church planters of all different stripes in the Dallas area and across the U.S. Let me ask you this one last question, and that is, give us your best shot. You're a leader. Tell us leaders what we need to know. Just what would you encourage us with?
Well, it might be twofold. Let me see how much time we have, but let me start here. If you're a new church planter, I remember getting on site. We'd moved from Shreveport. We moved here. I moved in because our house was supposed to sell and then had this crazy glitch. So I ended up moving in to the spare bedroom of Brad and Julie Riggins, the couple that moved here to plant the church with us. Number one, don't plant alone. Always plant in a team. Just don't plant alone. But anyway,
even if you have to live with them, huh?
I'm sorry?
Even if you have to move in.
Oh my God. It was, and we were like, we're going to call it the community at Lake Ridge. And they were like, well, I guess we're going to see if this idea of community works, that you live down the hall from me. We would eat bread, I'd go down and whoever was up first started the coffee. It was just what we did. But you don't know always what to do. Like, what do I do? We're here. I don't know what to do. And so really, what are your activities in the first days of relocation? That's not what so much I want to talk about. But once you kind of get up and you begin to gather a team, let me tell you what I think people, they don't always understand this. There's 4 things that a church planter, that leaders times, I believe, are divided into. It's some of the best training I've received. And as I've lived and walked this out, it's just played out to be true. And no matter how large the ministry has gotten or how large a church grows, it's still these 4 things. The only thing that changes is the percentage of time that you dedicate to one of these 4 things. And that the 4 simple things, the 4 things that you do as a lead pastor, as a church planter, as a kingdom, influence and a kingdom catalyst person, is you lead leaders, and you resource leaders. It's pretty much simple. It's that simple. Now, when you first start planting, you don't even have me. Of course, we had me and Brad, and I was leading him, but 80, 90, 85, 90% of my time was doing. We were planting seeds. We were plowing, we were preparing, and I was leading Brad. And then before long, as we began to gather our launch team and gather those people and really sort through to make sure they didn't have just attenders, but we were really trying to grow a launch team. And so Brad and I, because he came from a large church, he was like, okay, of the 100-person structure that we really need, he goes, look, I'll take these 50 hats and you take those 50 hats, and let's see who can get rid of our hats the quickest. In other words, how can we start to empower people, hand things off so that we're leading them? So you do, then you lead, but then you got to begin to raise some of those up to leader status. So now you're leading leaders, and you do that long enough that you're doing less so you can lead more. You're doing a little bit more or less so that you can lead leaders more. And then you have to do a little even less so that you can spend time resourcing your leaders. I think sometimes we get stuck in the doing, and it's why our churches get stuck under 100. Is that helpful?
That's fantastic. That's book worthy. I'm waiting for the Paul Mintz lead resource leaders to come out. Hey, Paul, you've been a great friend to me. You've been just an incredible leader to so many. Thank you for your time. Keep up the good work, and we look forward to God doing even more through you in the future. So thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, JD. Love you too.
Thanks for joining the Leading Conversations podcast. We hope that you found it both helpful and encouraging. At TCAL Leadership Network, our focus is on the church planter rather than the church. If you'd like to find out more about us, visit our webpage at excelnetwork.org. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. See you next time with another leading conversation.